Podcast. Today, my guest is Jeffrey Biegel, a pianist and composer. I would say. What are the other titles you go by,
Sorts.
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey. It's very simple. You wear a lot of hats, but it's you wear one and then you take it off and put the other hat on, then you put the other hat on. It's just I like the variety. I don't really call myself a composer
Okay.
because I write music, but I don't compose big works like Beethoven or when I think of composers, I think of Bach, Beethoven, Brahms,
Gotcha.
and their living counterparts today. Uh, for me, well, we'll talk. You can ask me questions, but we can go into
Oh
that. I don't
no,
want to
that's
go too deep too soon.
well, no, but kind of what's your background as far as let the listeners know what you have going on and what you've
Oh
had going.
gosh, background. It's well, I was kind of born a misfit anyway because I couldn't hear when I was a child till I was 3,
Right.
and my parents didn't know that really because they thought maybe just late bloomer. Doctors were telling
Sure.
them, late bloomer, he'll talk, he's lazy, or he's just shy. Oh, not.
Yeah.
But not being able to hear does close your world. So you tend to do things to compensate for that. So I would
Yep.
look around myself, I would look more, use my eyes to see, and I built a sense of what's around me from what I couldn't hear.
Sure.
So that's what I did. And I went to the piano as a little child, maybe 3.5, 4 years old. The surgery was at 3.
Okay.
So, and in a strange way, I remember it. There's that living image in my mind of just the bright room where I was in. And I mean, literally floating. I still remember that sensation. You can't forget this. Floating on the top by the ceiling of the operating room, looking down at 2 physicians over me. I just remember that.
That's
Surgeons.
crazy.
And they just opened up the ear canal that was blocked. Eardrums not really vibrating much at all. They were a little, but not much to decipher what words were. And they cleared all that out, whatever they had to do. Tonsils, adenoids, I suppose. They kind of just gave me the gift of hearing. And
Awesome.
then I went to the piano. So the music was really my first language, so to speak. And the rest is history.
Yeah.
Grew up in a family with other children. And my mother used to sing a lot. I remember hearing her very high. She wanted to be an opera singer or something like that. And I just remember that very light, bell-like, beautiful singing quality while my father was in the police department. So
Nice.
he was youngest captain appointed to the NYPD back in the 70s, worked his way up. So playing records and playing the piano and just music part of my life, nothing extraordinary. I whizzed through piano method books and all the scales and arpeggios and things like that till I was about 2.5 years. I went to another teacher, and then 6 years later to the teacher I ended up with at Julliard when I was 16. And I was always playing piano, but always feeling this silent devotion to the past, meaning just playing a lot of music that all the great composers wrote. And I just felt that it was my job to do it now, to keep it going. So then there's more that came after that, which I had no idea was coming.
Did you ever have, I mean, and do you listen to contemporary music or was it always classical?
Oh, no, it was mostly listening to pop music on the radio.
Okay.
I mean, the Billy Joel and Neil
was Billy
Sedaka and
Joel.
the Supremes and everything. I ended up meeting Neil Sedaka later on because we had the same teacher at Julliard, which was quite a story. But no, I used to go to the store and buy 45s all the time. I still have a lot of them.
Yeah.
So I loved the music of the 60s and the 70s. And I enjoyed that because they put so much feeling into what they were singing and composing. Many of them were singer-songwriters. And I really liked that a lot. I thought that was the music of my time. And of course, the classical music was mine to
Was
do.
there? Yeah.
And I did have recordings of great pianists playing and listen to symphonies. So there's a little of this, a little of that. Everything kind of just fused together, kind of inspiring me as a child.
It's interesting how music can bring. Yesterday, I go to pick something up for my wife, and this lady at the Jamba Juice is wearing a Temptations sweatshirt,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, I love that sweatshirt. She goes, do you really? She was kind of surprised, and I go, well, yeah, I haven't seen them in a while, but I saw them with the four tops. She goes, when? I go, probably 88, 89 in Vegas. She goes, my husband was the musical director of the Temps back then.
Go figure.
I'm like, what? What are you talking about?
It's amazing
Yeah,
how these little connections happen. It's like, oh, the world is smaller than we think.
it really is.
It is. It's fascinating.
It's one thing we talked about before we started recording was technology, and that's just like me talking to somebody in New York City right now, live.
Yeah.
How has that changed music and
Well,
being a pianist?
it's changed in a lot of ways, a few ways. One is I used to put together press kits,
Yeah.
which meant you had to have your bio, you had to have your reviews, your photos, newspaper articles, all made copies of all these things, stapled them together according to their categories. Then you'd buy the folders, go to Staples and buy folders and envelopes. And then you address them to everybody separately with a cover letter, and you spend a fortune at the post office. Well, the website eliminated pretty much all of that, which
Yeah.
was great. And in 1997, I did not have an email address or website or anything yet. But it was an interesting thought I had. I was in Europe playing somewhere. I don't remember where it was. And I just thought, wouldn't it be interesting to think about it in the 1950s? A great big apartment house in any city, anywhere, would have had maybe one or two black and white television sets.
Yeah.
And then when I Love Lucy would come on, everybody would crowd around that TV set, which was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting now that we're entering this age of the computers and
Phones.
having everything? Wouldn't it be interesting to bring classical music closer to people that may not ordinarily want to or have time to go to concerts? Bring it to them in their home. We didn't have phones or any like what we have now. But 25 years ago in 97, I did just that and created the idea to do the first classical live stream.
Oh, wow.
And I phoned the head of Steinway Pianos in New York, the artist department. And I asked Peter Goodrich, are you game? Do you want to venture into turning the rotunda of Steinway Hall into a mess of wires and connections? Yeah. And he said, yeah. And we did it. And
That's so cool.
They asked which piano I'd want to use. So I said, let's do something really way out. And the only way out piano case at that time was the 500,000th Steinway, which was a 9-foot piano, but with a very unusual case. And so we recorded it simultaneously, and it fed the web using Real Player. And I kept those videos. They're on my YouTube channel, the internet concerts, in 3 parts. I don't know how to take those Real Player files from there and convert it to something better. Maybe there's a genius out there that could do that. But they're there. And then a European company brought me over to Amsterdam to do the same in early 98. So those were documented as the first classical live streams. Yeah. And look where we are now. I mean, now I've been writing to some companies that are doing virtually being there, which is what I wanted back then, but I didn't know what to call it. I just,
it wasn't there.
Why can't we, get people to feel like they're there, but they're not there? What do we know? It was, very unusual thinking back then. And so I kind of did that, and which led into the future.
Have you done any thought or looked into virtual reality with the goggles? Because I would imagine there you are sitting at the concert hall, looking around, music.
There's a company doing things now that they've already been doing, and I wrote to them to see if they'd be interested in doing the first classical, what they call the metaverse. So we'll see
You
if
never know.
they respond, but it would certainly be a nice way to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the classical live stream.
Yeah, it was.
But we'll see if it's supposed to be. It's you know, I'll be 61 soon. Honestly, I've learned a lot over the years, and one of them is the things that I wanted to make happen that I kind of forced to
Yeah,
try to make happen wouldn't, and some of the things that I worked less at did.
just fell into
And
place.
when a lot of times I'll go and do educational outreach when I'm performing and go into schools. And one young person asked a question, what advice would you give us young people? I said, oh, that's easy. He says, that fast? I said, yeah.
Yeah,
I said, follow your yellow brick road.
yeah.
And I think I always say to the kids, how many people have seen The Wizard of Oz? And very few hands go up. They think it's some old movie
Yeah.
from whatever. I said, you watch that because everything about life is in there. Everything about the people in your life is in there. And just traveling that yellow brick road, what's around the corner, you don't know, but you got to go on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
Good
kind
advice.
of, yeah, I mean, I had to learn it for myself too.
Sure. That's the beauty with age, I guess. I always tell people a lot. Life is a lot of timing.
Oh, all of it.
So I mean, when you meet somebody in your life, it's the right time, whatever time that is.
I always think it's all mapped out.
Yeah.
And we
I do
just
too.
have to go through it. Some composer once said to me, Richard Danielpour, composer who wrote a concerto for me, he said, we were at Julliard together. A lot of the composers from Julliard I stayed friends with. Those are the guys that
Yeah.
and women who wrote concertos for me. But he said something in front of an audience. I don't know how this piece ever came into existence. And he looked at me and I took the microphone. I said, it was already there. You just had to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
he's
exactly
like,
right.
oh,
It's a good one.
oh,
Thank
yeah,
you,
you
Jeffrey.
did good. You did good, kid. I think that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. How much traveling have you done over the years? How many different countries? And
Mhm. I've been to Singapore and to Japan twice, Hong Kong. Um, been in Russia back in 87,
wow,
88, that Christmas, New Year's time. So we were in what was called Leningrad, which
right.
is back to St. Petersburg and Moscow and Tashkent. I've been to the north of Norway and throughout Europe and Hawaii, Alaska, Canada. I would really like to perform in Australia, New Zealand, go back to Asia, parts of Canada. I haven't been yet. Iceland.
Okay.
I only stopped in Iceland for an
Yeah.
airplane drop for a minute, which was kind of cool. Transfer.
That's very cool.
Haven't been in Sweden, been in Finland, been in Yugoslavia when it was Yugoslavia,
Yeah.
which was very interesting before it broke apart. Being in
That's
Moscow
like
was interesting too.
I was going to say you were in Russia when it was the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Totally different.
Oh, it was very different. It was with the Seattle Chamber Music Festival when their cellist, who's passed now, she was fabulous, Toby Sachs ran it. And I went with them. And the sister city for Seattle was Tashkent. So we were there too. But I'll never forget being in Moscow. The Hotel Rossiya was the hotel, which is not there anymore, but it was this monstrosity that took up blocks. And it took about 15 minutes to get from your hotel room to the lobby in the middle of the winter. It was great. I really liked it. There were pianos on each floor. There were so many different stations where a lady would give you your key to your room.
Oh, I got you.
And they'd have a piano there. And I think I played one once. And I remember in St. Petersburg, there was a nice baby grand in the hotel we were staying in. And I had my winter coat on and I sat down and one of the people on the tour says, go play something, play some Gershwin. So I played Rhapsody in Blue. A horde of young people came around the piano. It was just a wonderful moment,
Yeah.
to be able to share Gershwin with this young crowd of people. So there's been some interesting stops along the way.
So in those cases, are you a hired gun, or I mean, if you're with the Seattle Philharmonic and you live in New York, do they just call you up and say, "Hey, we're doing this"? How does that work?
Oh yeah, usually, well, if you're to guest with an orchestra to play a piano concerto, they hire you, and festivals as well, recitals or master classes in teaching. So you're the hired guest, and typical like that.
And so when you travel though, it's just I mean, obviously you're not bringing your own piano, I would think.
Oh no, I couldn't afford to. Oh, that's they. In the old days, I don't know how
Yeah.
they pulled that one off. Today it would be cost prohibitive. You couldn't even think about even taking the bench.
Well, I know that's like
Ah,
some of the guitarists and bass players. I talked to Rudy Sarzo. He plays bass for Ozzy Osbourne and all that. And when he shows up, sometimes he doesn't even bring his bass. Like
really?
they have guitars there, and he'll just go,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, but he has to know in advance what's going to be there.
yeah, yeah.
I would imagine.
Are you the
We
same
usually
way?
prepare. Yeah, we prepare in advance in the contracts because I'm listed as a Steinway artist for 35, 36 years or so, which
So it
means
has to be
I,
Steinway.
I endorse the Steinway piano, which is nice because I love the instruments.
Yeah.
And that gave me the impetus to approach them about doing the first classical live stream. And then in 2010, they came to me and asked me to be the first pianist to record for the Steinway record label. It was the first time they did that. And I was like, is this some sort of a sick joke?
Yeah. That's
It's like,
cool. No.
why'd you come to me? I said, well, we liked your Christmas album you did for another label and thought maybe you could do a Christmas recording for us to start this label. I actually said, no. I said, I don't think, number one, I don't want to be known as the Christmas pianist. I love the holiday music.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love it to pieces. And I've written a bunch of things for holidays, but I felt for them, I said, yeah, this isn't about me. This is about the piano. And I feel let's show off the piano, but you don't need another recording of Beethoven. Let's do something
Different.
that is different, where music is recorded that was not composed for the piano. Hey, there's J.S. Bach. How do you like that? So we did a Bach on a Steinway was their first recording. Then we did the Christmas album second.
Okay.
And then the third one was a tribute to Golden Age pianists. That's kind of my heart and soul. Talk about that too. But yeah, so it's in the contract that they
That's
have to
gotta be
provide a Steinway. Long story short.
Does it always have to be a grand or a baby grand, or do you do stand-ups ever, or how's that? I don't know.
It's supposed to be 9 foot
Okay.
concert grand. They say perfectly tuned Steinway concert grand. It depends. Sometimes they'll have a 7 foot. Those are beautiful instruments, Model B. But other than that, no, unless for any reason they don't, which is very rare that they
Okay.
either can't afford or don't have a Steinway, they'll ask me, and then I will consult with Steinway and say, it's happened once many years ago. I said, they only have X
XYZ.
brand.
Yeah.
And they said, it's okay. No, they know I'm not going to jump
Whatever.
ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How for you? How big of a difference is it with the 9 foot versus a 7 foot?
The 9 foot just gives you a bigger sound. The
Okay.
7 foot, in a way, gives you a big sound. However, you could get more color with the 7 foot because it's a little smaller. For some reason, a really good 7 foot Model B, if it's voiced well and it's in good shape, is a very warm but a big sound. It's a big enough sound. Depends on the size of the room too.
Sure.
Because if you're playing, let's say, in a recital hall, they don't need the 9 foot in
9 foot.
there. And they say, well, we have a 7 foot, but it works well here. I said, that's fine. Because sometimes in a smaller room, you could do more with a 7 foot than try to tame the 9 foot. So
Yeah.
it
So don't pare
depends.
back the 9.
Exactly. It depends on the room it's in, I think.
That's so cool. I love see that's the
Yeah.
stuff I love hearing because like
Yeah.
I look at a 9 foot. I mean it's just a big old piano. You know,
It's a
just
big old piano, is what I
yeah.
mean. And some places, you have to travel. And when you get there, uh, I like to get someplace a day or two before so you could try the piano, get used to it. It's like meeting somebody for the first time. You got to get to know what the piano's about,
Yeah.
and also get to meet with the technician and work with them. Um, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to show up in town and say, well, it's just too loud. Voice this down. The worst thing you could do with a piano technician is intimidate them to make them get to do what you want for the sound. You work with them because, again, I always say it's not about me. It's not about the tech. It's about that instrument. And that instrument has its own life to it, its own quality. So that it's really between the artist and the technician to find out how to make it sound the best possible. I remember reading somewhere that Arthur Rubinstein, the pianist, I only met him once when I was a little boy. I just like couldn't get near him after a concert. I ran out to the parking lot and had him all to myself. It was great. Uh, he said, don't dwell on what you don't like about the instrument in the end, or find what's wrong with it. Find out what's good about it, or the sound that you could find, that little sweet spot in that instrument, and make the most with that.
I gotcha.
Which is a really healthy way to do it. Otherwise, you
Yeah.
could pull your hair out. So, and every instrument's so different.
What do you think that the difference is between a really accomplished pianist and someone that does it for a living?
Well, they got to be accomplished to do it for a living.
Well,
There's no
yeah, but I
doubt.
mean, what's
Yeah.
that? What made you break over and be able to do this as a job and a career, versus how many people go to Juilliard or a good school and
Yeah.
don't pursue it any further?
I don't think it's something we personally choose. If you do, I think you're crazy
Okay.
because it's an art form that really does find its players. I think it's to have a passion for something is just because you do, but I think to make a living at it, it's very different now than it was when I was younger.
Yeah.
And that will always change just because the nature of art evolves. I always tell my students, don't get stuck in the past, because then you're just going to the museum. You have to, it's like my teacher used to tell me, you remind me of Joseph Levine, my teacher. She would say, it was Adele Marcus, my teacher. She was very tough, but she was so passionate about that tradition.
Yeah.
And she, whatever she had to say and get you to do to understand that and treasure it and value it and make it part of what you do. It made a big difference for me. And Joseph Levine was one of the great pianists of the 20th century. So I used to play and she'd say, you look like him, you sound like him. It reminds me of him. I mean, for her to say that was like, whoa, it was like a ghost came in the room. And the more I listened to him and played, I thought, yeah, who knows? It's this, who knows what's out there? Could it be possible that, who knows?
Yeah.
That's going into a science fiction fantasy world. But, what I don't know won't hurt me.
Yeah.
I'll embrace it and I'll play. But I also feel to make a living with music is really, it's not just soul searching, but it's really thinking out of the box.
Okay.
And not to, I don't like to do things because I think, oh, I'll make money doing this. Because honestly, till this date, I've never made a fortune doing any of the things that I felt would hit. That's not the way why you do it. And I always teach my students, we're just part of this train going by. You hop on, you help it evolve. We're all going to get off at some point.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not just to do all the classics, but it's like what I tell composers before we do commissioning projects. I always say to them, hey, this isn't about me. I said, it's not about you either. And they're like, what? Because composers are like, this is my work. They're the creator and I'm the recreator. I said, but this is really about us working together to evolve the art form and to bring new music. I think bringing new music to the fore is important because in 20, 30 years, it's going to be old music.
Yeah.
And it happens all too quickly. And a lot of times the music, takes a long time for it to register and become part of the mainstream repertoire. But I teach my students to be open-minded. I think making a living as a musician is a very broad topic. Like I said, I love pop music and I grew up with it. And I've written some songs and I'll never forget back in the late 90s or even 2000. I mean, I became friends with Keith Emerson from Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Oh, yeah, ELP.
Because he wrote a piano concerto that a friend of mine, Danny Dorff, a wonderful composer, told me about it. I said, he says, I can't believe you don't know this with all the new stuff you do. I said, no, I didn't. And he sent it to me and I fell in love with the piece. And so I sent him an email to the company. I said he sent it to Keith, and that's how Keith and I became friends, very, very dear friends. And I told Keith, I said, I got some pop songs. What do I do with them? He says, well, you got to get them to David Foster. I'm like, well, you're telling me to go to the Wizard of Oz. How am I going to do that?
Yeah.
But I did. I found David through his office and this office to that office to that office and his secretary. And we became friends because he loves classical music. He loves piano. He loves opera. He's done so much for humanity and for artists, pop artists. He's made careers for them. But we became friends that way. And I always liked being open to not feeling like I'm limited. I always feel that. And everybody's different. There are classical artists who will not dare do the things that I got pieces done, like the Peanuts Concerto or the Burt Bacharach Concerto or the Monkees Concerto. Neil Sedaka wrote a concerto that's beautiful. Jimmy Webb wrote a concerto for me that's beautiful. These are good songwriters writing great music. And I just felt, well, it's kind of putting me in touch with the world that I loved as a kid.
Sure.
And the songs of Jimmy Webb, Up and Away, and Wichita Lineman, I'm like, hey, he's writing some classical piece because he loved classical music, and a lot of the pop people do.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be part of that bridge between them and my world.
Do you ever get into electric organs or any of the electrical midis and all that?
I did once just with Roland, and was able to compose some arrangements of music on there, and it helped. But as a rule, I haven't. I like to fiddle around with them to, press the harpsichord button and play it and say, whoa, Bach on the harpsichord, just press a button, or an organ sound to get the effect of that. That helped me in interpreting Bach's music. Or choir, press the choir button and play a fugue. And oh, that's what Bach's music sounds like being sung. But for performances, no, I haven't done that. No.
And any hopes too?
I doubt it, because I leave that for the pros who know how to do that. That's just totally, I would make so many mistakes fumbling on those keys because I'm used to the weighted acoustic piano. So the digitals would probably flip me out. It's a different response.
Have you, because I know they have, they'll have the 88 weighted keys on some of the electronics, but it's still a different feel for you?
It is different because of the response, the sound quality of the response, where I'm used to playing an acoustic piano, which the way you approach the key and draw the sound from the instrument that way. I see the piano more as a string instrument, like a harp.
Yeah.
And the key is just the method to get to the strings. When I teach, I always say, imagine you're going to play the strings, not the keys.
Yeah, yeah.
And I get really evil about legato, to teach my students, because I used to play legato, meaning smoothly connecting the sounds.
Yeah.
So I think pedal is great. I used to pedal to do that more, and now I find my fingers are doing it more. I always tell my students, take your foot off the pedal and make your fingers do the work. And I'm, in teaching, I'm very big about singing out loud when you practice, because I think the voice, when you sing out, it brings out what you feel in the music, and then the fingers just follow the voice. So I always say, sing what you see and play what you sing. So to me, the acoustic instrument will give you that, where the digital, unless it is really a high quality one to create that seamless sound when you play, I could detect the little separations, and that bugs me. But they're good. Good ones are really good.
Yeah. But that's why I love talking to a high level person, because for me, there's no difference. I mean, I could play a crappy stand up or a 9-foot or a Roland, they'll be the same.
It's funny, you asked earlier about the level of pianists who do it for a living or not.
Yeah.
There are so many people playing the piano, and you could find somebody who's, I know surgeons, eye doctors who were pianists when they were young and then went to med school to become physicians. And then when they got older, they returned to the piano, and they play so beautifully. I don't treat anybody differently, whether they're if I had the greatest pianist in the world in one room and they wanted to play for me, and they would ask me advice on something, and then you had another person in the room who was a heart surgeon, but played as a youngster and kept playing through their lives. I bet you that the heart surgeon is doing something that is just very natural and very beautiful. And the person sitting next to them, who was a great pianist, would say, you do that? What did you do? Sometimes they just play and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think it's an individual thing. It doesn't matter whether you're a pro at it or an amateur. It's just, if you have a talent for it, you could be doing some very beautiful things no matter what.
Well, like we were talking about as far as timing, you know, I I wonder like how many kids, and I say kids, young adults, are in Juilliard or a school like that, and they want to be a pianist, and then the timing just doesn't lay out where
Mhm.
they don't get the right break, they don't talk to the right person, they don't hit the right whatever,
See,
but
that
yet they're still good.
becomes, that's something David Foster said to me once. He says, luck plays a big part. You
Yeah.
have to be lucky. You have to be in the right place at the right time for certain things to happen. Um, my advice to the young people is just spread your net. Stay friends with the composers. Make friends. One agent told me this at the management I started with.
Yeah.
It's just make friends in the business. Well, making friends, she said, in the business, and it's a business. And how, I mean, what I did was quite different. I hooked up with composers after playing for living composers. One time I was 12, I played for a composer, a new piece he wrote. And getting the composer's feedback was a big deal to me. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, Beethoven, I can't ask, what to do with that
Yeah.
measure. But this composer gave me feedback. And that's when it kind of, after I did the internet concerts, a couple of years later, I decided to go into the next century commissioning music. So
Yeah.
there's been over 12 pieces since then. And I think working with the living composers is a good thing, because then you're
You get to see
helping
it.
bring music to the repertoire
Yeah.
that way. And you're making friends in the business and you're learning new pieces. And
What?
it's a big job raising the money for it. But what's nice is if you play a new piece and you make mistakes, nobody's going to know.
You meant to do that.
Exactly.
you know, it's kind of like how we met, right? I mean, you have a friend who's an actor, and I interview him, and
It's
now
terrific.
we're talking. It's all a lot of it's relationship.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I think I think it's good that you tell your students that, because I think
It,
some just get so involved with, well, I'm going to play the keys the best I can, and it's not always
teaching.
that.
Yeah, I've been at Brooklyn College at the Conservatory of Music teaching since 1999 and heard a lot of people. And we teach their performance majors and education majors and BA students that just want to play piano as part of their Bachelor of Music or Bachelor of Arts degree.
Yeah.
And what I want most to do for my students is, of course, to prepare them to play well as they can, play the jury programs, those tests that you get twice a year, and your final recital. That's all well and good. But what are you going to do with it? And to me, that's the most important thing, because they could all graduate. And of course, it's not the school's job to get jobs for the students, but to help guide them to find ways that they could do something with it after. And more recently, I've had a couple of students, because during COVID,
Yeah.
I composed, which was unusual. I really wasn't doing much of it, except in the past writing choral music. The Hal Leonard published some of my choral music, holiday music, and different pieces, which I enjoyed doing. And I wrote piano music. Right when we were in lockdown, I wrote a couple of waltzes. I called them Waltzes of Hope, 2 of them. And they're on YouTube, you can hear them. And then after Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, I wrote a piece
Yes.
called Reflection of Justice. And I played it, on Seth Rudetsky's Stars in the House, and played it in some concerts. I was doing a lot of online teaching through the Sonata Piano Camp based in Bennington, Vermont, where we go usually to teach and perform, but we couldn't. So they turned it into a virtual world, which was fabulous. And so the Reflection of Justice became one of my pieces. And I just basically took all the names, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and her nickname Kicky, because she used to kick when she was a kid. So I know this because my father-in-law went to school with her in Brooklyn. So, and I decided to write this piece in her honor after she passed and played it. And when I was invited to perform at the Dallas Symphony, another work by Ellen Taves Willick, Pulitzer Prize composer, I created a project with Ellen to write something for Justice Ginsburg, and she did. And she says, I'm going to write it for mezzo soprano, piano, and orchestra. And I approached Jim Ginsburg, who actually is the son of Justice Ginsburg and has his own wonderful record label in Chicago. I asked him, who do you suggest? Because I wanted to ask him. And he says, you should ask Denise Graves, mezzo soprano. And my mother loved Denise. They were best friends. So I wrote to Denise and she said yes. So then came the raising the money for that commission for Ellen's Willick, and Dallas Symphony agreed to be part of it and present the premiere, which we did this past October. And then they asked me, what else do you have that you could play? Just piano and orchestra that fits the program. I said, well, I have the Reflection of Justice, but it's not orchestrated yet. And they said, could it be? I said, yes. And that's when I decided to talk to my student, Harrison Scheckler.
Oh, nice.
And Harrison was still at Brooklyn College finishing his master's degree. He's now at University of Arizona. He had done some incredible work of You'll Never Walk Alone. He took that right when we went into lockdown, and instead of a performance they were supposed to do at the college, he got like 300 people together and made this, and you could see this, it hit like over 1 million some odd hits on YouTube. It's absolutely, you need a tissue box. It was very beautiful, especially when we were going through this time, years ago. And I said, would you like to orchestrate this? Add orchestra to the piano part, and he did. And then I said, well, how do I make a demo of this? And then one of my current students, his name's Ji Chen, he plays really well, but he does like this unbelievable computer stuff with Logic Pro X, where they have music samples. And he created the demo for the RBG piece. It sounds like, what orchestra is that? It's just absolutely beautiful.
Amazing.
So then we went into the Martin Luther King piece, Reflection of Equality, and that's been finished and it's up. The demo's up with a beautiful video montage that Harrison created. And now we're finishing the concerto with Reflection of Freedom, JFK, which will be the first movement. MLK will finish it with RBG in the middle. So we're in production of that now.
Nice.
Yeah, so the idea is just students and what really can they do? It's quite remarkable.
You mentioned your age. Now I'm getting there quickly. But the piano's something you could play forever. I mean, to a certain extent. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I had a piano. Do you foresee yourself playing until you can no longer play?
Absolutely.
I think it helps you stay relevant too, though.
Well, being relevant is what you're doing with the music. I mean, honestly, if I would just be another artist playing just the same repertoire that everybody else is playing, it's difficult. It's very difficult to keep up because there's not as many opportunities out there for everybody to play the same repertoire. That's not why I do new music. I do new music because I love working with living composers. And honestly, doing the new pieces by composers has helped me interpret the old music by deceased composers because I see them more alive. It's a different sensation. But playing piano, I had a piano technician who used to be head of technicians at Steinway. His name was Steve Burrell. I don't know if people watching will know who he was unless they were pianists from that time. Steve said something to me I'll never forget. And it goes like this. Because it's interesting that the keyboard is like a mirror and it reflects everything about the person playing it. And I've found unusually, when I was a student of Adele Marcus at Julliard and watching her play at the age of 70 something, any of her students watching this will agree. How did you do it? How did she do it? How does she expect us to do this at our age? And Steve's quote is so true because as I've gotten older, I noticed that the sound of the piano, it could be the same instrument I have for almost 40 years. It's not just because the instrument ages, it's because I did. And the sound that I'm able to get now is different from many years ago. The pacing of it, the breathing of it, the emotion of it, the life in it. My teacher used to say, there are no substitutions for living.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to understand what she meant. It's like, you can't play like me. I'm 70 something. I've lived longer. And I think everything about that person is reflected like a mirror in the keyboard. So uh, I'm careful with my students to get them to play as well as they possibly can at that stage of their
Sure.
lives. And then if I play for them, like my teacher did too, so they could hear where they're going. So I think it's a good thing for them to at least have a milepost in the future, so they could see where they can end up
Yeah.
later on.
You're trying to make it in their own minds attainable
Yeah,
versus unattainable.
yeah.
I mean, because like I could see a young person being, I'll never be able to play that good,
Oh,
and you
I
want to
was
make
one of
sure,
those.
hey, in 40 years you'll be able to play this good.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
and everybody takes a different journey on that
Sure.
yellow brick road. You just don't know what they're going to play like. So, but I do notice sometimes there was a lady who was in her 80s and she was a member of the Chopin Foundation in South Florida, the South Florida chapter. She would sit down and she was, I don't know, 80 something. Because, oh, I played the Grieg concerto with the Chicago Symphony when I was, 11 or 12. She sat down and played the Grieg piano concerto. So it was just so natural, so organic, just so
So
beautiful. And she just got up and says, that's all it is. I said, for new.
that's a lot. Yeah.
I was like, just played. It was like, oh my gosh. It was very inspiring. So it gives you at least hope. I mean, when I used to hear my teacher play like that, I'd be,
Yeah.
but it gave me hope to think it's possible. At least that's the sound that I wanted to work for, which I think is important. I think playing for students could be a double-edged sword. Uh, it could either scare them to death to think, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to do that. But for the
Yeah.
most part, it's not done that way. It's to say, this is what you want to aspire to for yourself. No two hands are the same. But I think it gave me hope to think that's the sound. Also educated my hearing to say,
Yeah.
oh, that's what this could sound like. And I think that's a very important part of teaching, is to leave them off with, this is what it could sound like, and you'll find your steps to get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really curious. I've asked musicians, I've asked actors and directors, and most of them said almost the same thing. But I'm curious to get your end of it. Are you able to hear when, like, if you're in your car and you hear something, are you able to enjoy it, or are you nitpicking? Like, oh, they could have played that, or oh, they hit that a little differently, or oh, they should have upped it out here. Are you composing it, recomposing it?
Now, recordings are not always the be all and end all of what an artist can do. You're listening, but it's very different in a concert hall.
Sure.
So I always have that give and take of not to be judgmental about recordings, because having done it, it's a different dynamic, it's a different mindset. And I think it's not fair to say, well, should have done this or should have done that, because it's not always the person at the piano. It has to do with the levels, microphones,
Yeah. The
acoustics,
boards.
mixing, editing. I always make sure the producers will use full takes, because, hey, if somebody goes to hear you play a piece that they heard you play in a recording, you better be able to play it straight through
Yeah.
without too much. They'll say, I don't know, that recording was kind of clean. Why are you making so many mistakes? So it's a challenge, the sterility. Well, that's not really the right word. The perfection
Yeah.
of recordings is a dangerous foe, because when you go to perform,
It's not
are
perfection.
you trying to live up to your recording?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's dangerous. And that happens with pop singers too. When you go and hear them do something really
Absolutely.
loud, I know that song. It's like, oh, the record is better. Or, oh, this is better. One artist, I have to say, I don't know if she knows it or not, but Barbra Streisand is like the benchmark for me for
Live.
phrasing, feeling, pacing, telling a story. I always say, play that the way Barbara would sing it. And there's a certain the nuances, the way you would end a word. So you hear the last consonant because there's emotion in that.
Yeah.
It's that the feelings, word painting. And I like to do that with the piano as much as I can to make it sing seamlessly, which is hard because I always tell students, make believe there's no spaces between those keys. Make it like it's a canvas. It's a canvas. It's your painter's canvas. Or, if they sit and play like this, I'm going to say, boy, if you played tennis like that, you didn't be able to hit any balls. You have to treat that like a tennis court. If the ball's up on the top part of the piano, you got to move there. If it's over here, you got to go here. You got to move a little bit. You got to go where the music is, like conductors do. But that's, there's so much that goes into it. And even when you're performing, things you think about consciously while you're playing. Different in the studio as it is on the stage.
Well,
for me, at least.
That was going to be my next question, actually, was if you've played a certain song so many times in your life, I don't know classical music well enough to speak to it, but if there's a song that you've played since you were a kid, do you ever get bored of playing it? Or how do you keep it fresh, 40, 50 years later? You've been playing for almost 60 years.
I think it has to do with the life, just like I said before. You hear things, you feel things more deeply, just relevant to that time of life you're in. Something that, and you just hear voices in the piece itself. There could be a little inner voice that you hear more 30 years later, just because, oh, I didn't know that's there.
Totally
Finding something new in an old piece is great. I always feel, I'll tell my students, if you go to see a Broadway show and it's been playing for 3 years, it's the same actors. Why is it when you go, it feels like it was the first time they walked on stage to do it? So you have to make it like that. It has to be like you've never done it before. And it actually is, you go out and play a piece. It doesn't matter if you played it for 40 years. They're going to hear it there.
Yeah.
So you have to deliver the goods. But no, I don't get bored of a piece because it always feels, every day feels different.
I've never heard anybody, I love the fact that you just described the piano as a string instrument. I've never heard anyone, because it is. If you look inside of it,
the sound's coming from the string.
Yeah, that was a great.
By means of a percussive technique. Yeah. But it's a challenge because you're trying to create this seamless sound because strings are separated and keys are separated. We're doomed before we begin. It's like we're being told that we have to, walk but only on 2x4s and there's space in between. Don't fall in between the cracks. You're going to fall into the abyss of the earth. That to me is what the piano's like. The cracks between the keys are just, oh. And then I realized later on, I'm like, why is it the fingering is different on the sharps and flats? I'm like, oh, well, gosh, I looked at the darn thing. I said, those keys are so much more narrow than the naturals.
Yeah.
Things we don't realize until we really look at it and say, oh, well, that's why I have to curve the finger more. I use more flat fingers on the sharps and flats.
Yeah.
Because I need more finger to make sure I play that key. It's so narrow. Whereas you go down to the naturals, they're wider. Yeah.
That's cool.
Isn't it? It's different from,
That's very cool. So what do you have coming up? Like
coming up. We have the premiere. I have 4 premieres to do this year because they were all pushed during COVID. It's just like a mouse in a maze. In May, I'll be doing the world premiere of a piece that's for piano and orchestra by Daniel Pertu, wonderful composer. It's called A Planet's Odyssey. And I had this crazy idea to have a brand new planet, not like the Gustav Holst planets, which is famous, but something new where the pianist travels through the world and all the different planets And each planet has a variation of the main theme. So he created this, and he goes to all the planets with this
Wow.
piece. It's beautiful. Then there will be the premiere in July of the James Stevenson Piano Concerto, which is a knockout. It's an incredible piece. It's like the ghosts of Bartok and Shostakovich and everything, but just very American. It's a really wonderful piece. Then later in the year will be a premiere of an Iranian composer named Farhad Pupel. It's the legend of Bijana Mania, and it's a Persian story. I said, write something for piano, orchestra, and chorus based on a Persian story, and he did.
Wow.
That will be in Canada. And then hopefully a Thanksgiving concerto by Christopher Marshall. So that's using, we gathered together that theme. I said, write something for Thanksgiving. We don't have a piano concerto like that. So here we go. And then looking into 23, 24 will be Peter Boyer's Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue. So that's a project I've started a couple of years ago. And to coincide with the centennial of Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin. So I said, one time we'll celebrate the centennial of Gershwin's work with the premiere of a new work in the 21st century of a Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue. And Peter Boyer is terrific. And then there's hopefully going to be in 2025 a new work for piano and orchestra by Adolphus Hailstork. So we're working to
3 years out.
You have to be. You have to be. Yeah.
I never would have thought that.
It's hard to live in the present because you're so busy working for the future.
Yeah. That's why I always get amazed when you hear an actor and they're doing their red carpet, interviews and all that for a movie. They worked on that movie a year and a half ago, and they've already done 2 projects in between.
I know. It's so true. The whole platform of performing has evolved also. Back in 1988, it was about 5 or 6 months before she passed away. I got to meet Lucille Ball. Lucy, she hated the name Lucille, Lucy, and went to her home through a friend, a publicist who knew her best friend. And it was Paula Stewart, who was her best friend, who was on Broadway with her in Wildcats. And my publicist friend called her and said, this guy is a classical pianist, wants to meet Lucy. And so Lucy couldn't understand, why would a classical pianist want to meet her? I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding? And spent about 2 hours with her, with my wife. And she asked me a question. She says, do you just walk out on stage and play? I said, for the most part. She says, we could never do that. She just said, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that. We can never do that. We would go and meet the audience, talk to the audience. And it warmed us up. And then we were able to go and do our show. But can't you talk to them first? I said, it's in some places, yes. In some places, no. She says, well, I think you should try it. So who's going to say no? So I did. And I talked about the music that I was going to play and why Grieg wrote his Ballade in G minor or different things. And I remember that experience. It really was like, wow, this is great. And it gives the audience a chance to understand what the music's about.
Yeah.
So when I went home after that, I called her office and with her secretary, I said, please tell Lucy she was right. It was really very helpful because back then people didn't do it as much. Now they do more lecture recitals, talking with the audience. So I learned a lot from her. That's
pretty cool.
2 hours I'll never forget. You can live a whole life, but there'll be just that one moment you're like, oh, it's really incredible. Yeah, she was great.
That's awesome. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. What's the best way for my listeners to follow you and what you have coming up? Yeah, I mean, website.
Well, I have the website, jeffreybiegel.com, but I don't post the schedule on there because it changes.
Yeah.
And I really don't post it just really for security purposes. I don't, I think somebody once asked me that, why don't you put your schedule there? I said, hey, I'm the son of a city cop. I'm not going to put my schedule of when I'm not home on everybody can see when I'm not home. I mean, that's just mindset from when I was younger. But you just sometimes Google it or just you could see where I'm playing. Or,
do you keep up to date on your Instagram page?
Yeah, well, Instagram is challenging because you can only put photos and things like that. So it's a little difficult to keep up. But Facebook, I have.
Well, you got to start doing the reels.
I've been starting to do reels, which is good. I shared the latest reflection of equality on the reel. But generally my YouTube channel has, or Vimeo. I have a Vimeo channel. Vimeo and YouTube. I
Are
think
they all
YouTube
just
has
Jeffrey
everything.
Biegel?
YouTube might be Biegel 88. It's something, maybe Jeffrey Biegel. I'm not sure. I don't have that
Well,
set
I'll
up.
make sure I put the. I'm looking to see if I can find it real quick, but I'll make sure to have it on my website. I'll have all
Oh,
the
great.
links direct, so they can just click right on it and get right to you.
Absolutely. I have a Twitter page,
And
which
a
I
Twitter
enjoy
page.
using sometimes. I like retweeting things and adding a comment to help actually to keep their tweet going,
Sure,
which is nice.
it's all in the
So
algorithm, right?
absolutely.
Which is
Absolutely.
a whole another bizarre world.
It is
That
very much.
if you go back 20 years ago, the word algorithm meant something totally different. You know,
I look back and see that 1997 video of the first classical live stream.
yeah,
I mean, it looks jagged because it was real player, but it's authentic.
yeah.
It's history.
That's amazing, though. I'll
Yeah.
definitely watch that one.
Oh, great. Enjoy it. Hopefully
Yeah.
it sounds okay. We saved the audio. The engineer said, I'm going to record it on DAT. I'm
Yeah.
sure they don't use that word anymore, digital.
Audio.
But
Yeah.
we used those DAT files to make the recording. So the recording is now out as an audio recording.
That's
So my
cool.
recordings they could find also on Here Now, if it's still called that, or CD Baby. But you can find everything on Amazon. I have my own label, put a few recordings out on there. The new critical edition of Rhapsody in Blue is on there too. That's the recording labels, Naturally Sharp, just my label. So,
Of
yeah,
course.
it's all fun. Everything, we never know
Yeah.
what's going to come.
That's why we keep doing it.
Exactly.
So, again, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure to speak with you, Pete.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. And I hope everybody enjoys this time together.
Yeah. Well, they will.
Great.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.